Pick the right stock at the right time.
Good morning. You're watching Daybreak on Bloomberg Quint Live, and I'm Alex Matthew. First, the headlines. Asian markets start the day on tenterhooks after Wall Street posts its strongest intraday recovery this year. Oil prices fell after members of the OPEC ended the day without taking a decision on production cuts. The Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs has given its in-principle nod to sell the government's 52.6% stake in REC to Power Finance Corporation. At the current market price, the deal will add 11,000 crore rupees to the government's coffers. HCL Technologies will buy select software products of IBM for $1.8 billion. The deal is likely to be completed by mid-2019. And voting has begun on the 200 seats in the Rajasthan Assembly. Polling also begins in the 119 seats in the Telangana Assembly. Let's talk about the U.S. markets, the equity markets in particular. U.S. stocks closed mostly lower on Thursday after a dramatic session that saw the Dow Jones Industrial Average plunge more than 700 points at one point on fears that the arrest of the Huawei executive would reignite trade tensions. However, the market clawed back most of those losses on a report that the Federal Reserve may turn more accommodative. Bloomberg's Sue Keenan wraps up all the action on Wall Street in this report.
What began as an ugly risk-off day on Wall Street, stocks sold at the open. By midday, the Dow was down more than 700 points, and it was risk-off in almost every other asset class. Ended with U.S. stocks staging a sharp reversal. Tech buyers came in. The Nasdaq closed in the positive, and the S&P and Dow Jones closed well off their lows. Financial markets remained volatile mainly because of the arrest of the Huawei official in Canada, which fueled fears that the dispute between the U.S. and China would accelerate. Bank shares led the losses along with energy stocks. The S&P 500 banking index fell almost 4% before cutting its loss by the close. In terms of actual stocks, we did see the FANG cohort, with the exception of Apple, all close in the positive. Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Google's parent Alphabet all posted gains. Boeing, which had been down more than 7%, cut its loss in half despite a report out of Brazil that the merger with Embraer will likely not occur. And OPEC, despite meeting without any agreement, caused oil prices to fall significantly. At one point, they were down $50. They managed to close just under 52, West Texas Intermediate. And there are many strategists on Wall Street that predict much more volatility ahead. In New York, Sue Keenan, Bloomberg News.
You know, the last point that Sue was talking about, the crude oil prices, they're going to be in focus today as well, but we'll come back to that point. For now, let's go straight across to Bloomberg's Sophie Kamruddin, who's joining us live from the Hong Kong studios to tell us what's happening in Asia this morning. Good morning, Sophie. What are you picking up?
Well, good morning and TGIF, as we are seeing gains for Asian stocks at the end of a volatile week as investors grapple with a shifting narrative around U.S.-China trade talks in light of the developments around Huawei. Now, suppliers to the Chinese tech giant are rebounding in Taipei after sinking Thursday, boosted perhaps by chipmaker Broadcom's strong 2019 sales forecast. And tech is also leading the Kospi higher, and in Tokyo, Japanese shares are rising after a three-day decline that wiped out $256 billion in value, but gains in Tokyo have eased mid-morning. Now, ahead of U.S. jobs data due Friday, treasuries are holding steady with the benchmark at around 2.9%. As Fed Chair Jay Powell said, the U.S. labor market is very strong by many measures. Back to you.
Thanks so much for that, Sophie. Now, let's talk about the big event today, if you can call it that. It didn't turn out that way last evening or yesterday. Members of the OPEC wrapped up their much-anticipated meeting without reaching a final agreement on production cuts. That's what happened yesterday. They postponed details of that decision until the group officially meets with non-member oil producers later today. Bloomberg's Aaron Clark has more in this report.
OPEC failed to reach an agreement for a production cut. The discussion was centered around cuts of around 1 million barrels a day. And what Saudi Arabian Energy Minister Khalid Al-Falih said is that not all nations were willing to cut equally. Now, the main sticking point seems to be Russia, actually, which, of course, isn't an official member of OPEC, but they are part of this OPEC Plus group that implemented the previous cuts. What Bloomberg has reported is that Saudi Arabia wanted Russia to cut by about 300,000 barrels a day, and that Russia came back and said that they only want to cut by about 150,000 barrels a day. So, you know, I think that as they get into the nitty-gritty, this is where the real negotiations begin. Now, there are additional talks scheduled today. The non-OPEC producers, Russian Energy Minister Alexander Novak is scheduled to fly back to Vienna today. So we'll just have to see how those talks continue. But so far, there's no deal.
All right, but let's continue to focus on commodities. I'm joined by Yash Upadhyay, who's got everything that's happening in the oil markets to tell you about. Yash, they were talking about that 1 million barrels per day cut. Is that going to be sufficient? What levels are the analysts talking about?
Good morning, Alex. So, crude oil futures on the New York Stock Exchange dropped more than close to 3% on Thursday, the most in almost 2 weeks, amid signals that OPEC and its allies, along with Russia, won't be able to curb the output enough to erase the supply overhang. The Saudi oil minister on the sidelines of the event said that they don't expect the allies to reach to an agreement and expected to meet yet again on Friday to discuss the output cut, which is expected to be a combined 1 million barrel a day, is what is being discussed. Meanwhile, U.S. crude stockpiles, they dropped for the first time since mid-September, down to 7.32 million barrels last week, as exports jumped to a record, according to the data released by the Energy Information Administration. All base metals, they closed lower on the London Metal Exchange. Copper sank to a 3-week low, and aluminum and nickel both fell close to 2% and 3% respectively, tracking a deepening sell-off in the financial markets as the arrest of Chinese executive Huawei, which is the smartphone mobile manufacturer's CFO, escalated further tensions between the United States and China. Spot gold prices, they recovered and ended marginally in the green, on track for its first weekly gain in nearly 3 weeks.
All right, thanks so much for that, Yash. Well, let's turn to the trade setup for the day in India and also to what's happening in the futures and options space. Agam's joining me now to tell you all about that. Agam, as of now, indicating a positive uptick for the end of the week. Right. What are the details there?
Well, let's find out, Alex. We are seeing about 0.5% increase and advance in the SGX Nifty futures. As you know, as we've spoken about, there's been a little bit of reversal in a lot of these American stocks, and as you can see, we're an up move there. Well, in our own markets, we did see a lot of weakness. In fact, the Nifty was down well over 1.5%. And the mid-cap and the small-cap indices fell in tandem with the benchmarks, with the Nifty and the banking PSU index also down by considerably. In fact, the PSU banking index down by nearly 2%. More weakness in auto and IT sector too, so no exceptions there either. And moving on, in terms of American depository receipts, what we saw was more weakness again, largely on account of that the sharp drop that we saw earlier in the session for American markets. And there you have it. Say for HDFC Bank, all these counters were in the red. Well, futures in terms of FIIs, we did see about 72 crores worth of buys from foreign institutions, and DIs, on the other hand, sold stock worth 390 crores. But moving on, what we've also seen is, well, very few gainers actually. In fact, we just had 2 gainers on the Nifty yesterday, as compared to, well, 48 for odd losers. And Reliance Industries, Maruti Suzuki and HDFC Bank were among those which were adding pressure. But there was weakness all around. Moving on to futures and options, well, we did see selling pressure intensify to a certain extent, considering a 5% increase in open interest. And coming down to the Nifty banking futures too, we saw more and more unwinding. Now, this time we've seen another 10% decline in OI, even as the underlying declined by around 1.2%. What really happened when it comes to options was your max open interest shifting from 10,500 to 10,200. Of course, should we see some strength coming through, this level could go back to around 10,500 put, and we'll be watching out for that. On the higher end, of course, it continues to remain with the 11,000 call. In terms of changes in open interest, again, we did see a lot of writing in the high level options such as 10,700, 800, and 900. But moving on, your VIX, of course, well, not on unexpected lines, rose by around 5% to 19.3. Your put call ratio fell to 1.44. Your banking put call ratio, well, rose to 0.98. And, well, coming down to a few stocks, just, well, considerable weakness or shorts there. And besides Just Dial, we've also seen a lot of weakness in Dish TV. In fact, the second day round, we've seen a considerable increase in open interest towards Dish TV. Moving on, we also have a lot of traction in Muthoot Finance, of course, reacting to earnings, which is why we saw the stock come off by as much as 6%. And we also have Indian Oil Corp, which also showed weakness. So there was weakness all around, Alex, but we're likely to see some amount of recovery today.
All right. You know, there is one aspect that we used to take a check on perhaps a year back, and we don't look at very often, and that's Bitcoin.
Right.
When it was around $20,000,
right,
a Bitcoin, we used to check on it every day, but we don't check on it very often. Now it's around $3,300 thereabouts. Bitcoin.com CEO Roger Ver, however, remained buoyant about the cryptocurrency markets. Talking to Bloomberg's Stephen Engel in an interview in Tokyo, he said that long term, the future is brighter than ever as there is more awareness. Listen in.
I'm a fundamentals investor, so I'm investing on fundamentals. Long term, the future is brighter than ever. There's more awareness, there's more adoption, there's more stuff happening all over the world. So, of course, I'm incredibly bullish on the entire crypto coin ecosystem and Bitcoin Cash specifically.
But there's been a number of different fraud cases, and there was hacks, CoinCheck earlier this year. There was a Ponzi scheme earlier, or a couple of months ago here in Japan, that was uncovered. Has that undermined the credibility of cryptocurrencies, in particular Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash even?
If anything, I think it's brought additional awareness to the ecosystem, and the fact that such big players are involved, and the fact that hackers are trying to hack it shows that it's worth something. If it wasn't worth anything or wasn't useful, hackers wouldn't be wasting their time trying to hack it. So if anything, it's just more bullish signals that cryptocurrency is here to stay and here for the long term.
Now, what does it tell you when the regulator here, the FSA, turns over basic regulation of the industry to the industry participants rather than the bureaucrats? Is it going to be more safe, or is there more hazards possibility?
Well, I think the industry is the group that's the most knowledgeable about the industry. So, of course, they're the ones that have the most incentive to make sure they do a good job of not letting their customers' funds be hacked, not letting bad things happen to their users, because if bad things happen to your customers aren't going to be your customers anymore. So to think that a politician in some government office somewhere knows more about how cryptocurrencies work and how to keep them safe from hackers, I think that's just naive. So, of course, it's the industry participants that know the most and have the most skin in the game. So they're the right ones to be handling this.
All right, but do remember that you can't trade effectively on Bitcoin in India because you can't use banks to transact and to buy Bitcoin. Anyway, let's take a check on the rupee. The rupee depreciated by 44 paise to close to 70.9 against the US dollar on Thursday amid a strengthening greenback and a sharp decline in equity markets. The dollar and yen rose on safe haven buying after the arrest of a top executive of Chinese telecom giant Huawei in Canada for suspected Iran sanctions violations renewed concerns over US-China relations. Now, credit ratings major Fitch has said that it expects the rupee to weaken to 75 against the dollar by the end of next year on account of its widening current account deficit and tightening global financing conditions. Meanwhile, bonds rose to over 8-month highs as rate hike fears faded after the RBI promised to keep buying government bonds to infuse liquidity. On to news in the M&A space. HCL Technologies will be acquiring select software products from IBM for $1.8 billion. The company expects the deal to close by the middle of 2019. Agam Vakil is joining us to take you through all the contours of that deal. Agam, it seems like a very large number. How big really is the deal for the company?
Well, Alex, it's a reasonably large size acquisition. It's not the largest that we have seen, but it certainly is significant considering they are putting in about $1.8 billion. That's HCL Technologies for buying certain software products from IBM. Well, the addressable market here and the scope for these products is as much as $50 billion, according to HCL Technologies' press release. Now, we must understand that because these are products, they will enhance Mode 3 segment for HCL Technologies. This is one of the relatively smaller segments, but it is the one with the most robust growth, and it certainly will add more going forward. Now, Mode 3 deals with products and platforms, and this is something that will enhance that Mode 3 portfolio. Now, HCL Technologies is looking to buy about 7 products from IBM, and 5 of these are products in which HCL Technologies already has a partnership with IBM, so it will be taking over fully. Of course, we are awaiting more details as far as the mode of financing is concerned, but for now, we do understand that HCL Technologies has about little under 220 odd million in cash, and well, about another 500 odd million as far as its investments go. So we'll be watching out for how they intend to finance these acquisitions.
All right, thanks Agam for that. Now, in a development late last evening, the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs gave an in-principle nod to sell the government's 52.6% stake in REC to Power Finance Corporation. The government, which is looking to achieve its steep disinvestment target of 80,000 crore rupees, will probably receive 11,000 crore rupees from this deal based on where the market prices stand currently. Bhanvi Arora, who was at the cabinet briefing last evening, filed this report.
The Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs has given an in-principle approval for strategic sale of 52.63% in REC to PFC along with management control. A group of ministers headed by Finance Minister Arun Jaitley will work out the modalities of the sale. The acquisition is expected to be completed this year, as said by the Finance Minister Arun Jaitley. Now, earlier there was a plan of REC buying out PFC, but Power Ministry was not in favor of this, and Finance Ministry has gone ahead with the proposal of the Power Ministry that they want PFC to become a holding company and REC to be a subsidiary. This is a part of the government's exercise to meet its divestment target, and also earlier it was decided that the two NBFCs to come together so that their operations are handled easily.
All right, let's also listen into the comments from the Finance Minister, in fact, Arun Jaitley, on the REC-PFC deal synergies.
The Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs gave an in-principle approval for the strategic sale of 52.63% of the total paid-up equity shareholding in Rural Electrification Corporation for its transfer to the Power Finance Corporation, along with transfer of management control. This was discussed at length in the interministerial meeting, and in the Finance Ministry we agreed finally to the proposal given by the Power Ministry. The Power Ministry wanted the PFC to become the holding company and the REC to become the subsidiary. It doesn't make a difference because they'll be a part of the same management setup. The two will remain separate companies. The shareholding of one will be controlled by the other, so that there is a synergy in their lending policy itself.
All right, now Nikki Mirchandani is joining me now to tell you all about the stocks in the news. Nikki, what are the stocks that are likely to move on account of news? I would guess PFC, REC are on the top of your list, but what else?
Yeah, apart from PFC and HCL Technologies, bulk of other news that we're tracking this morning, I'm going to start off with Vedanta, where the Indian court is expected to reopen Vedanta copper plant. That's a Reuters news that we have. The plant is unlikely, however, to resume production because the Tamil Nadu state government is going to be appealing the Supreme Court against the production of this plant. Coal India, that's again a development. Government has sold in more than 2% equity there in that counter to CPC ETF, which is managed by Reliance Nippon Life Asset. With this, the government holding in Coal India further falls down to around 72% from 75%. Lupin, where the Canadian arm has gotten approval from Health Canada for a vaccine drug, which apparently is used for the treatment of irritable bowel syndrome. Jet Air is expected to be in focus, given that the company has sought a $350 million soft loan from Etihad. That's a PTI development that we're tracking.
All right. Thanks, Nikki, for that. Well, those are the stocks that you have to watch out for in trade today. On to elections now, and that's going to be the big talking point both at the end of this week and going to next week. The polling will commence for 200 seats in the Rajasthan Assembly. The BJP is locked in a two-way battle with the Congress in the state. Other parties like the BSP and the Aam Aadmi Party are also in the fray. But what also makes things tough for the ruling BJP is that the electorate of the state has not voted an incumbent government back to power since 1993. Tamanna Inamdar has this report that tells you everything that you need to know about the elections in the state.
The desert state of Rajasthan has been a revolving door for chief ministers since 1993. The BJP and the Congress have held power in the state in turns for the last several years, which is why holding on to the CM's chair will be no mean feat for Vasundhara Raje. Let's begin first by taking a look at how the Rajasthan Assembly is stacked up. Now, elections for the 200 odd seats that make up the Rajasthan Assembly are going to be held on the 7th of December. Results of course, will be with all the other 4 states on the 11th of December. 101 is the magic number in the state of Rajasthan, and in 2013, Vasundhara Raje had more than enough. She swept the elections with 160 seats out of 200. We're giving her the credit because she was the face of those elections, though a lot of it was down to the Modi wave as well. The Congress, of course, was left with just 25 seats. And why is it being called a push for the Modi wave? Well, the vote shares in the last elections of 2013 hold the key to that answer. Because if you look at how the BJP performed in 2003, when they had a 39% vote share, in 2008, they had a 34% vote share. Of course, the Congress won that election with 37%. But in 2013, they had a 45% vote share. So even though the incumbent chief minister at that time, Ashok Gehlot, was not being criticized too much for his governance, but he seemed to have no hope in the sweep of that Modi wave. It's going to be a battle of the royals, and it's going to be definitely one exciting one because there are such big personalities that are in the fray. Also, a big test of how the Congress manages to solve these tricky situations within its party where there's more than one player vying for the top spot.
Indeed, do stay tuned for all the coverage on those elections. In fact, on all the assembly elections that are taking place, there's a lot of action to look forward to. You'll find all of that and more on the website, bloombergquint.com. The more that I'm referring to, I will tell you about right now. Here are a couple of stories that you'll find. The National Company Law Tribunal has rejected the insolvency petition filed against RHC Holdings on the grounds that Insolvency Code does not allow for such petitions to be filed against non-banking financial companies. And the Serious Fraud Investigation Office has accused the former top management of the insolvent INFS Group of using employee welfare trusts to enrich themselves by over 440 crore rupees, revealing a cocktail of embezzlement, conflict of interest and also lack of accountability. Read all those details in the story on the website. That's a wrap on this edition of Daybreak, but all you need to know is up next, so do stay tuned. This is Bloomberg Quint.